Hello students, today we are gonna learn a new grammar item. It is called the type 2 conditionals. It is one of the grammar items that we have to learn in our Longman ELEC 6A textbook, chapter 6. In this video, I will first talk about the definition of type 2 conditional and give you some sample sentences. And from the two sample sentences, we will find out the sentence structure of type 2 conditional. And then I will talk about the special use of verb to be in type 2 conditionals, which is special. And then for the last two parts, it will be dedicated to doing some revision questions to check how well you understand type 2 conditional and give yourself a challenge before you come to the next class. Now let's first talk about definition. Type 2 conditional sentences are used to describe a situation that either it's unlikely to happen now or in the future, or it does not exist, which means that they are unreal. So now let's take a look at some of the sample sentences. I will first focus on one of the definition of type 2 conditional, which is to describe a situation that is unlikely to happen now or in the future. Here, I am very poor. It means that I don't have a lot of money. And now I try to imagine myself having a lot of money. And I make this sentence. If I had a lot of money, I would buy an island. In the real world, I don't have a lot of money because I'm poor, and I definitely cannot buy an island, right? So, in this sentence, I'm just using my imagination to imagine if I have a lot of money. So I will use type 2 conditionals. Here, it's another example. I am a student. I'm only a student, so it is very unlikely for me to suddenly become the principal of the school. So I will imagine myself as the principal, and I will have this sentence. If I became the principal of this school, I would cancel examinations. So am I a principal now or in the future? Not really. And so I have to use type 2 conditional to talk about this imaginary situation. After looking at the two sample sentences, let's try to analyze the component of the sentences and the tenses used in type 2 conditionals. These are the two sentences that I have used just now. And in the first part of the sentence, it is the if clause. If I had a lot of money. This is called the if clause. Same case happened to this. If I became the principal of the school, this is also the if clause. The if clause provides the condition for the next part to become true. So, in the second part, it is the result. This is the result. The same applies to the second sentence. I would cancel examinations. It is also the result. Of course, we have to fulfill the if clause first before the result will come true. For the tense, let's take a look. If I had a lot of money. And also, if I became the principal. Can you see what tense we use? Yes, you're right. We use simple past tense here for both sentences. This is the first part of the sentence about the if clause, and we will use past tense. Take a look at the second part. I would buy an island. I would cancel examination. You can see it is a would plus a bare infinitive, which means the verb didn't change after would. So that's the structure and also the tense of type 2 conditionals. After understanding the component, also the tense used through the two sample sentences, let's try to generalize the sentence structure for type 2 conditional sentences. In the if clause, of course, we will have if, and the verb we use would be simple past tense. And then we have a comma, and then we type until we reach the verb, and then we will use would plus an infinitive. An infinitive means there is no change to the verb after the word would. So bear in mind, it should be the original form of the verb. That's the general sentence structure of type 2 conditional. Now, let's move on to the last teaching part of this video, which is to talk about the second definition of type 2 conditional sentences, which is to describe situation that does not exist. What is the meaning of does not exist? In other words, it means it is not real. Take a look at the following sentences. I'm Miss Sao Yang. Of course, I'm a human, right? But I would imagine myself as a bird. I would write, if I were a bird, I would fly to England. Can I be a bird? Of course not, right? Because I'm still a human. So here is an imaginary situation which is not true and not real, and definitely not exist. And let's take a look at the second example. With the same first line, I'm Miss Aoyang. Of course, I'm a real human living in the real world, right? But if I wanted to put myself in the shoes of Dorothy, which is a book character in The Wizard of Oz, as we have learned last lesson, what should I do? I can use type 2 conditionals to talk about such situation. If I were Dorothy, I would go back to Oz. Of course, I cannot be Dorothy because I'm a real human and she's only a book character. It does not exist. So if I want to talk about imaginary situation which is unreal, we can use type 2 conditionals. Now let's try to analyze the sample sentences in a greater detail. Let's see if we can find the two components of type 2 conditional sentences, which are the if clause and also the result. If I were a bird, if I were Dorothy, they are starting with if, so we can be sure that it is the if clause. Can't you find the result? Yes. As you can see here, I would fly to England. I would go back to Ox. These two are the result. There's nothing strange about the components of a type 2 conditionals. However, please take a look at the verb used in both sentences. Let's take a closer look at the tense. In the result part, we said we would use would plus a bare infinitive. Would fly, would go. They sound pretty alright, right? Because we follow the rule. But let's take a look at the if clause. If I were a bird. If I were Dorothy. Surely they're both simple past tense. However, shouldn't we use was instead of were after I? Isn't it a bit a strange thing to you? And that's actually the special part of type 2 conditional that I want all of you to remember. Usually when we talk about simple past tense after certain pronoun, for example, I, he, she, it, we use was. But when it's in type 2 conditional, all of them are actually followed by were. So rather than saying if I was, we say if I were, if you were, if he were. We never use was in a type 2 conditional. Please remember it. Although this video is quite short and I only give you a very limited amount of sample sentences, I hope all of you at least grab some basic understanding of type 2 conditionals. Now let's try to do two questions to revise what we have learned just now and also put what we have learned into practice. Look at the sentences below. Can you tell me which one is correct? A. If he had her number, he would call her. B. If he has her number, he would call her. Which one is correct? You're right. Answer A is the correct one. As we had mentioned, we use simple past tense in the if clause, so we'll use had instead of has. So if you've chosen A, give you a big round of applause. This is the second question. Please take a look at which sentence is correct. A. If I was you, I would go to London. B. If I were you, I would go to London. Do you know which one is the correct one? The answer is B. If I were you, I would go to London. Why is it the correct answer? In our last teaching point, I reminded all of you a special feature of type 2 conditional, which is they always use were instead of was, no matter what pronoun it is in front of it. So even though I should be followed by was, in type 2 conditional, we have to change it to were, if I were you. So B is the correct answer. Great job, everyone! I'm sure all of you have understand at least some of the type 2 conditionals. Now let's move on to the last part, which is a challenge. There are two sentences here. The first one is, if I have a lot of money, I will buy an island. The second sentence is, If I had a lot of money, I would buy an island. Can you tell me how are they different from each other? Is there any change of meaning if I use different tenses? Think about it and I'll ask you next lesson. Thank you for watching the video and I hope you enjoy my teaching. Thank you. Bye bye.